Hello everyone. Thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity to see you and to pitch in front of you. I'm Pavel. I'm the co-founder of Northern Lights Entertainment. We are a 19-person studio making video games, and the reason why we're here today is because we're building the social fabric of the metaverse through meaningful games. Now, what this actually means for us, because of course everybody has their own metaverse definition, is that within the metaverse, what we would like to try to achieve is to try things that cannot be tried in real life. And what this means for us is that we would like to experiment with new forms of governance and inspire public policy when it comes to citizen inclusion and political participation, but we do it through games. Our insight, or the observation that we have made, is that players are increasingly interested in everything that has to do with politics, whether this means political interactions within the games themselves or politics in real life. You see, for a very long time, I was a moderator in a very large game whose franchise is basically owned by Ubisoft. And I made an observation that the people and the players who stayed within the game for the longest time and people who spent the most money within the game were the ones who were, one way or another, implicated in the political life of this virtual world. Now what this means is that either players were competing against one another for influence recognition or in-game perks, but also on a more social level, groups of players were striving to achieve competing objectives against one another for the purposes of rewards, of in-game rewards. Based on the trends that we are observing right now of increased political participation from citizens, whether it's on the left, on the right, or in the center of political spectrum, based on the fact that players are increasingly more interested in political interactions within the games, but also in real life, and based on the fact that every single one of us has basically a gaming device in our pocket, we would like to do what hasn't been really done before, is experiment with new forms of governance within virtual worlds. So what we're doing is creating a game, since we're a game studio, which is called Nebulae. Nebulae is a massively multiplayer online strategy game, which will be released on mobile first and on PC afterwards. And within Nebulae, players take collective control over various political regimes, and they can basically try out new forms of organization, new forms of political structures within this censorship-free environment. So for a little demo, you start out as a planet governor. And on this planet, you're responsible, of course, for the economic prosperity of this planet, but you're also responsible for the quality of life of the inhabitants of this planet whom you govern. And on top of everything else, you're also responsible for the management of environmental risks that can arise on the planet that you're governing if, for example, you over-industrialize it or if you overpopulate it. And as you progress through the planetary gameplay, you discover that you're actually part of a virtual nation, together with hundreds of thousands of other players, and you're in fact part of what you could be describing as a virtual country, together with, whether it's a democratic regime, a totalitarian one, or a monarchy, and together with other players, you're basically taking control over the laws, the economic management, the diplomacy, and the deployment of military power of these virtual nations. And you have the power to even transform, for example, a democracy into a totalitarian state. Or vice versa, if you have sufficient player consensus behind you that would allow you to push forward your political agenda. So yeah, so much for the gameplay. So you start out as a governor, you discover that together with hundreds of thousands of other players, you are part of a virtual nation which you govern together with them. And of course, since we're building a game that positions itself to be as a mass market one, there's also a combat in space component, since we're finding ourselves in a fictional galaxy. How do we make money? So we're not a play-to-earn game, which probably is a little bit unorthodox in the current context. The way in which we make money is basically through cosmetic microtransactions. So we're selling skins of ships, of planets, of architectural elements within the game to the players. But that's not the most interesting part. The most interesting part actually begins as we start to scale and as we acquire more and more players. Because this allows us to conclude partnerships with brands who would like to do product placement, as they do increasingly more so within gaming companies. And we have actually been approached by the French Ministry of Defense already, because they would very much like to partner with us in creating a more serious game type simulation that can be used for the purposes of geostrategic analysis and analysis of risks that can happen when political changes occur in real life. Where do we stand today? We have been playtesting the game since November 2021. We have nearly 2,000 registered players already. We have already made over 44,000 euros in revenue, confirming our business model of selling basically skins and other in-game customizations to players. And very, very important in the context of the talent wars through which we're living right now, we have over 550 professionals from the video games industry who would like to join our team. So we're right now in a very enviable position of being able to do this and have between 10 to 15 developers lined up ready for interviews, which is a pretty good place to be in. Based on the playtests that we have conducted so far, over 91% of players are actually satisfied and with the political component of the game and think that it was fun to play with, which isn't necessarily something that you would expect from a game where politics is a core gameplay component. I mentioned earlier in the pitch that we position Nebulae to be a mass market game. And we really mean it. And a particular audience insight that we have is that 11% of players who are registered for the game today do not even consider themselves as gamers at all. And the reason why they chose to register for the game was because they were very curious to try out the political and the environmental components of our gameplay, which they haven't been able to see or meet in any of the competing games that are out there right now. And on top of the 11% of people who do not consider themselves as gamers at all, we also have about 13% of players registered today who actually describe themselves as casual gamers. So if you think about it in terms of audience design, that means we have roughly 1/4 of overall players whom you wouldn't necessarily expect to find in a typical strategy game, which is a very good place for us to be. Impossible not to talk about our wonderful crew. I mentioned earlier we're 19 people. We are. We're full-time. We're all based in France. Not everybody is based in Paris. And the beautiful thing about this team is that, yes, we come from the world of gaming. Of course we do. But we also have a lot of experience in media companies, in entertainment companies, and in software companies as well. And for those of you who, as we believe, that the metaverse should be inclusive and diverse, we actually have a gender balance in the founders team, but also a wider gender balance in the overall employee team. We're fundraising right now, so if there are investors in the audience, you can come and find me right away. We have a lead investor already. We also have a term sheet that is already signed. And if you believe, as we believe, in a metaverse that should be inclusive and that should allow us to try things within the metaverse that cannot necessarily be tried in real life, such as experimenting with new forms from governments and coming up with new political structures, then you should definitely join our journey. Thank you very much. And I think we have some time for questions. Yeah.
see as like a strategic vision for you to be here? Who are you trying to connect with, and what kind of connections are you making?
Right. So, for those who didn't hear, the question was, why are we here, and what is our strategic vision at the conference today, and who are we trying to connect with? So, the purpose is dual. First, we're basically trying to demonstrate that the metaverse doesn't have to be some abstract concept that only occurs in the cloud, and that it can actually have very much a real-life meaning and real-life impact as well. Because one of our goals is to inspire public policy when it comes to political inclusion and political participation of citizens in real life, based on experiments that we can conduct freely and safely in the world that we're building in. So that's goal number one. So it's kind of a demonstration. Second, since we're fundraising, of course, it would be lovely to connect with prospective investors who share our vision and who share our ambition as well.
Max, what the kind of the marketing promotion are you expect to do, and how would you like to promote your project? Because I understand that there are a lot of funds which should be included in this project, and the marketing part should be really high quality. That's why I'd like to ask which way of the promotion, which the unique proposal you would like to create.
Okay, so if I understand the question correctly, it's how we're basically going to market the game once it is out, and even perhaps before it is out? Is that the question?
Yeah, what the marketing plan for the game for now?
Right, so several layers to the question. Of course, in today's environment, it is virtually impossible as a small-scale studio, which we are for now, to launch a game without involvement from influencers and from the press. And specifically on the press component, we actually have a competitive advantage, because mainstream press can see a lot of parallels between what the players will be doing and the forms of governments and the types of political regimes that the players will be creating, and then they can basically kind of get inspired and draw parallels to what is happening in real life with all of the citizen movements that we have seen sprinkle in the left and the right and in the center. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is, of course, you cannot circumvent classical user acquisition campaigns, whether it is through social media, whether it is through advertising, and perhaps in a not so distant future, maybe even a deal with, as you probably know, there are a lot of user acquisition purposed companies who basically allow startups to acquire new players and new users as well. With pleasure, with pleasure. Any other questions?
The last questions before the next pitch, so don't hesitate if you want to ask a question.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your attention.